Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks Show. The NBA is almost here, Brian. So I'm going to ask you before I do introductions, who you got, Clippers or Lakers?
Oh man. Well, the city of Los Angeles wins either way. Honestly, I'm a big fan of both of these rosters, and I think people calling for the Lakers under. I don't know. They might get there. They might get the over.
So who you calling, Clippers or Lakers?
I'll go Lakers. I'll go
Okay,
Lakers.
game opener tomorrow, Lakers. I'm starting to finally see the daily fantasy sports stuff showing up. And they're claiming Anthony Davis and LeBron James, two people that keep coming up on the show because we mentioned them in the talk I gave at the Great Lakes Analytics Conference about the draft and tanking, how these players both ended up oddly on minutes restrictions when the Pelicans and Lakers were out of playoff contention. So now that they are on the Lakers, allegedly they don't have a minutes restriction. So we shall see. I like it. I'm going to go the other side. I'm going to give my boy Kawhi a shout out and go with the Clippers. We will see who is right. Okay. I'm your host, Trey Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. You just heard from Brian Foster, our producer, voice of God, a man of many hats. You can find him on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. I just mentioned Daily Fantasy Sports, Brian, so let's get our sponsor out of the way before we go through our topics. DailyRoto.com. If you use promo code Nerd Numbers, you can get 10% off. They are a daily fantasy sports site. If you're looking for ratings, an optimizer, a late swap optimizer, which they do have for NBA, with NBA right around the corner, DailyRoto.com for all your DFS needs. Okay, so we have a couple of stories to go over, Brian. I think we're a week or two out. I think we had our podcast last week kind of right around when all this kerfluffle was happening. But Daryl Morey and Hong Kong/China. We're going to talk some amazing extensions, including Ted Leonsis. We're going to do some stat lessons based on more internet drama that I think you wisely avoided, Brian. Apparently, when some of us other stat geeks are on the internet on the weekend fighting, I think you're probably like out enjoying the sun in California. I don't know. We're going to talk more of Greg Steele's grades. I'm going to get through that eventually, Brian. He has a ton. I think I'm a quarter of the way through all the grades he did, and then we've got some other teams, but should happen. All right. Let's get going. I'm going to start on the most complicated one and probably try and breeze over it, Brian. But Daryl Morey, so for those that forget all of what happened, Daryl Morey, all he did was retweet an image saying free speech, like saying free Hong Kong, because there's all sorts of stuff there about their agreement with China and then how long they're allowed to stay their own unit. It's very funny, very British, right, where we have a lot of colonial influence where there are colonies that want their own control. So China's got the same type of thing going on, I know, with Hong Kong and Taiwan. Daryl Morey, while his team was on a trip to China, commented on, just did that and immediately kind of got in trouble with the Houston Rockets. We've learned more since from Adam Silver that basically the Chinese government was demanding that Daryl Morey be fired over it. And I believe you were mentioning there's a streaming service out in China that basically said they were going to stop streaming NBA games. It's gotten even more weird. I believe there are some people that have had free Hong Kong signs in the United States at things like 76ers games that have been asked to leave or remove their signs. This is kind of blown up, and then kind of the pinnacle, the weirdness is LeBron James has come out basically against Morey. So that's where we're at. The most recent thing we did see that was good, though, was Adam Silver came out and said they asked us to fire Daryl Morey, and we're never going to do that. So that is really, really interesting. And that could obviously take multiple podcasts. I'm going to try and look it up really quick, Brian. I'm going to let you talk for a second while I look it up. But I was going to say that could fill up many podcasts, and I'm going to find a great one, including one of the podcasters is actually in Hong Kong, so he has a lot of good thoughts on it. That could take up a lot, but I figured we'd touch on it briefly because it is kind of in our wheelhouse, where it crosses that nice political and NBA thing.
Yeah, well, I'm just disappointed in LeBron mostly because he's been pretty good on political stuff lately, but just in general on this, I don't think there's enough there for me to really say a whole lot, right? Like, Adam Silver claims he stood up for Morey, and like you said, China demanded he was fired. China claims they didn't. That Silver is lying or not telling the truth. I don't know. So, yeah, it's disappointing, and there's not much for me to say, really. Like, it looks like everyone's kind of wrong here.
So if you look up the Exponent podcast that's hosted by Ben Thompson and James Allworth, this was recommended to me by Jeremy Britton, friend of the show, not a shocker there. They have a great episode, came out October 15th. It's called The Abyss Stares Back, and they talk about this. And what's funny, Brian, I'm actually proud of us because I made like a stupid business metaphor about like gazelle versus elephants, and you compared it to the Oregon Trail. But the point being, this is kind of a well-known thing in startup culture, which is the clients you approach, you get into weird positions. The elephant metaphor kind of being you have this big client that can pay all your bills, which is awesome, right? But because they're so big, they wield so much influence over what you do. They can say, hey, do this, and then you might have to compromise the plan of your company. Gazelle being they're not as big, they can't sustain you, but they can't pull you around as much as an elephant. And in the Exponent podcast, which I listened to, they basically pointed out a lot of U.S. companies are now starting to face this issue. They brought up Google, Facebook, Apple, one other big one. I can't believe I'm forgetting their name, but the big tech companies and then the NBA are similar in that China is just such a big market that's worth so much money. But if you basically follow your wallet before your morals, you end up in this weird position. And they were talking about this kind of stuff where, Facebook's got weird things going on. Apple's agreed to, remove apps from their store in response to that. Google has had a long, tenuous relationship with China. And the NBA is in the same boat. And, the best comment I saw on this was basically, we're not selling out every NBA arena in the U.S. We should focus on it's funny because it sounds very make America great again, and I want to avoid that. But they're basically saying, why are you worried about this market that may not even be worth as much as you think? One of the friends of the show, or I don't want to say friend of the show, but, I think we said first ballot Boxscore Geeks Hall of Fame because he named the Yay Points theory. Just one of our favorites, Ethan Strauss, one of the best Golden State Warriors writers. I believe he wrote about, how the China market is not worth as much as you would think to the NBA. It's not trivial, but the point being, do you really want, I think it was something like 11% of the revenue. Do you really want something that conflicts as much with your morals as it does, that's not even worth that much money to be what's guiding how you go? And I would definitely agree with that kind of take.
Yeah, and I also liked what Nate Duncan said about this, I think it was a week ago or so, is basically that the NBA requires this media availability, right, as part of your job as an NBA player or coach. So they're putting players and coaches in this position where they have to answer these questions. And there's not really a good answer that these players or coaches can give. So the league is putting them in a tough spot.
Well, what's amusing, and I saw, apologies because this is just kind of from the ether of Twitter, so I apologize. I forget who said it directly. I'm calling it a Brian subtweet. I'm going to do some real subtweeting later in the show. A subtweet for you youngins on the show is when you reference someone without directly tagging them on social media. So you're talking about them without letting them know you're talking about them. I think it's fine. I think it's a bizarre philosophy that, especially for anybody that has thousands and, on social media, there are people with millions of followers. It's a bizarre thought to say they have to know when anybody's talking about them, especially if they're a public persona. I include ourselves in that. So that's one. But a Brian subtweet is just when he forgets and he's saying something good. But, the note being every NBA player could have just said money and it's above my pay grade. Sorry. The Marshawn Lynch, I'm just here so I don't get fined. Perfectly acceptable answer. And I think
fair.
You said there wasn't a good answer. I mean, I think you could just say, look, I'm a player. I don't make these decisions. And I do know that it affects, I've got sponsors, right? I've got endorsers. I was just in China playing. That's my paycheck. If you've got complaints about this, I'm not the one to be talking to it about. So I think that would have been an acceptable answer, which is why I think people felt hurt by LeBron. Although I think something that gets obvious about LeBron, it made me feel sad. So I'm sad on two ways about this China thing. One, it put me on Morey's side, which I feel bad about because, we have been more critical of him. And if he ends up out of the NBA, if him and Sam Hinkie end up out of the NBA, these are two of general managers in NBA history who've been the most critical of it, though I think we like them both a lot. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship. But if two of the most quote unquote analytic savvy GMs that we have criticized for things most people don't normally criticize them for, and out of the NBA for things that we disagree with. I would be kind of shocked on that. So that was one. So I'm on Morey's side, even though I'm just like, Austin Rivers, what the hell are you doing? So there's that. But the other, like, I think it made me sad because I've been one of the LeBron, defenders, right? Who gives a damn about the decision. He's given Cleveland more than he needed to even before he brought them a title. The people that try and, get upset with him for stuff are wrong. And it made me feel bad because I went on the other side. It may be the point that he is trying to politicize himself for his post NBA career, become an owner, etc. It's obviously assured that his goal is to become a billionaire. So that's what's rough. I mean, I do think the best take I've heard is, when you follow the wallet in front of your morals, it gets hard, and it gets really hard when we basically have cross-cultural ideas that are entirely different. In the United States, the idea that I'm allowed to say whatever you want. Now, admittedly, Brian, I'm not as comfortable as I once was, but in the United States, you can go to Facebook, and one of the funniest experiences I had, I was a consultant at a company that worked with a breast cancer awareness site that, was for like people that had breast cancer, survivors, et cetera. And they had a message board. They were like, hey, that we have problems with the message board. The images aren't loading. And I went there and there was this entire subsection of a breast cancer survivor message board that was like anti-Obama, which was really weird. It's always weird when part of your job gets you into that and you've got people, saying racist stuff about Obama. Always fun. This was, of course, obviously during the Obama presidency. But this idea in the United States that you can say whatever you want about the president without fear of something happening to you is something we take for granted. And that's not the case in other countries. And so it does get interesting when you're trying to do business and you do eventually end up with a fundamental divide of I'm allowed to say whatever I want versus you can go to jail for saying that. You kind of, like I said, the Exponent podcast talks a lot about this very point where you kind of have to decide what is guiding you. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it was disappointing where I guess Steve Kerr and Steph Curry are the two that I noticed most that did this, where they just totally took a pass, right? They said, oh, I don't know anything about this, so I'm not going to say anything.
I will give you one out, and I know Popovich is in the same boat. I will give you one out. And I know it was what pissed me. Well, I know what probably pissed you and me off both about this is, and when that happened, the broken clock twice a day bullshit. Trump came out to say like, "Oh, look at Steve Kerr this weekling," blah 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 blah, and it's like, it frustrates me, and I'm like, you noted this very well. It's bad faith, right? You don't take that at face value. Mm-hmm. He's not doing it for the right reasons. You're naive as hell if you think suddenly Trump's got it right. But it's frustrating. You're like, I'm annoyed that there is even a kernel of truth into what you're saying. It is frustrating. And I don't want to be hypocritical and, tribal and just say, shut up, you're wrong. The one defense I heard about the way Steve Kerr and Steph Curry handled it, it's just a really complicated situation. I don't know. I'd have to research more, is that the NBA teams were still in China at that point. And the idea being they basically were, I don't know if they were coached, it's possible they were either cowardly in a way that we can insult them for, but this is a nice, easy pass, right? Or they were justifiably going, I don't want to put people that are likely already under a lens in an even bigger hot seat. So that's the one out I've heard that I could probably give justification. And again, LeBron James could have done the same thing, could have done the duck, could have done the pass, and there's no problems. It's when he went the other way that was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, and that's why LeBron was more disappointing because, Curry and Kerr were, I don't know, they just wanted to take a pass, but LeBron did not. Like, his tone was just like, come on, guys, stay with China.
And then the rumors were, so it gets really hard. You were noticing the same thing, that Silver's come out and said China wanted us to fire Morey. There rumors abound that LeBron James was asking for Daryl Morey to be reprimanded for his actions. Really?
Oh, that's interesting.
But it's so stupid and effing innocuous, and that's what pisses me off is, but that being said, it does show a thing, right? Like you're going, this is a cultural difference where you have to make a decision how we go forward. More as this develops, I guess would be the way to say it. If you're going to fire Morey, fire him over Eric Gordon, fire him over Avery Bradley. If this is what kicks me out of the league, I'm going to be so effing pissed. And my cat's chasing her tail as we do this. Okay, let's get on to more silly stuff. NBA extensions. A bunch have happened since we've talked last and continue to happen. The funniest one that I have to get over first and use it as an excuse to get a tangent of is Bradley Beal signs a super. Is it a super max extension, I believe?
Let's bring it up.
So Bradley Beal of the Washington Wizards signs for a huge amount of money. And we're going to talk this a little. So we've had Greg Steele on the show a couple of times. For those that forget, Greg Steele of Greek God of Stats, he has made his own metric. And when we talk more, as we've talked before on the show, the reason we're more in line with it is we agree with the recipe format Greg has taken, namely mapping box score and now tracking data to actions, basically points and possessions, finding a way to map those to individual players, and then spitting the output as wins. That is the formula we like. Basically, you take the stats, you find out how to credit them to the players, and then you're able to use that credit to the players to map how much that is worth in terms of point margin or win. That's very simple. And then now the only argument gets into us saying, did you correctly map the values? Did you give the correct value to the player? Is the player correctly labeled? So what we do right is we just use the standard positions, point guard through center. Greg does by load, as in high load players, low load players, et cetera, on offense and defense. So, but Brad Beal is nice in that while we've had Greg on the last couple of weeks and we discussed players like Klay Thompson and DeMarcus Cousins, where our two methods differ, Brad Beal is one where we both go, he's an above average player, but what the hell are you thinking?
Yeah, and the biggest problem is, and this is going to be a theme when we're looking at all these contracts, the biggest problem is his position. He's a shooting guard, and that's the least valuable position in the NBA in terms of winning games, right? So, and the funny thing about this is it's a 2-year extension, and normally, you're going to want some for 3 or 4 years, but anyway, it was a 2-year extension, and it is $34 million for the first year and $37 million for the second year. So if that's not a super max, it's got to be close. That's a lot of money. And it's going to be really, really tough for him to be worth that contract.
And he's a little better in that regard under Greg's system, because under Greg's system, he'll be a high load player. Whereas under the wins produced system, as you're noting, he's a shooting guard, which is the weakest position. And that really is the crux of it. And I think in some discussions with Greg recently, what is important, I think, I'm going to sound very mainstreamish with this comment.
Good.
It's rating players in a vacuum makes no sense. And I've credited you with this term forever, Brian, the Brian bins of productivity, as just as a method of thinking. So to remind people, Brian has said this a couple times off the cuff, and it's just become a running theme where he's saying if Brian was looking at a team, he would look at basically different bins of productivity that you want to fill. And the metaphor we have stolen is from the movie Moneyball.
Yeah.
Because that they've lost Jason Giambi, and they're like, look, we've lost this many hits and this many runs and this many RBIs and yada, yada, yada. How can we replace it? And they basically say, look, we can't replace Jason Giambi with one player, but we can get this guy that draws this many walks as our leadoff guy. And this guy is our eighth guy who gets this many hits, so we get this many RBIs. And we can fill the missing production of Jason Giambi that way. And that's kind of how we view an NBA team, where we are saying you want to fill these bins of productivity. And it's a very, it's right up my wheelhouse, Brian, as a computer science major, where it is a satisficing problem. I'm saying I've got these different bins that I want to maximize the allocation of. Then I have a salary that I am forced to spend from. Then I have a constrained limit of players that I'm forced to choose from, right? It's an optimization problem. It's amazing. And the issue with Bradley Beal is you are spending too much money and giving too much responsibility to a player that now means, if you have an above average player, that's the cheat, right? If you have an above average player, you can always fill the Brian bins of productivity. I will give that logic. I will say, by our logic, an average team would have been out 41 games. So if you have a bunch of slightly above average players, by definition, you can probably be a playoff team out east, right? But as soon as you get $34 million is a third of your salary cap to one player. And Bradley Beal, let me see if I can get his stats. I had a bunch of them. I've got Buddy Hield. We're going to talk him next.
It's worth noting he is still under his old contract for next year. So it doesn't kick in until 21-22.
Let me just verify his shooting. By the way, we will say this funny note about Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal followed a Carmelo Anthony-like thing where he was never above average his rookie contract. And we bashed him, and then post-rookie contract, he was actually an above-average player, which was amusing. So he has been above average the last 3 seasons. His true shooting percentage at 58.1%, that's good in a Brian productivity sense, but it's not at a level where I'm as happy as I'd be with how many shots he's taken.
Yeah, and that's the point of this, is that teams have overcorrected and are now overpaying for three-point shooting, basically, right? That's why all these guards are getting paid. And three-point shooting is great. It's, one of the best shots in basketball. It's really valuable. But again, getting back to the Moneyball example, you don't want to overpay for it.
Well, it's also the reason I like that metaphor. We're going to stick on the Brian Binns of productivity is it's a trade-off, right? If I spend my money on three-point shooting, other things I am not spending my money on, and in some cases things that are hard to acquire cheaply. Bigs, despite this weird myth about the death of the big and whatever in the NBA, bigs still get paid a decent amount of money, and bigs are still obviously important. Like our complaint is that an above average high load shooting guard like Bradley Beal is going to get a bunch of money, whereas a player like Rudy Gobert has an incentive laden contract, but Rudy Gobert still got paid, right? Like, it's the good news in a max salary system. Those who don't know, the NBA has a max salary, which is based on your seniority. There's a max amount of the salary cap you're allowed to get paid. So that's why LeBron James isn't paid $50 million a year. The most they can pay him is between $30 and $40 million a year. Steph Curry, I believe, is the highest paid player in the NBA, somewhere in the mid 30s. Rudy Gobert still gets paid. He just gets paid a couple million less. And we think that's an advantage, right? If you don't have to overpay for Rudy Gobert, ready for this, Brian, my Donovan Mitchell hate punch card, I definitely get a free soda this week. If you save money on Rudy Gobert and then waste it on a player like Donovan Mitchell, we're like, well, you saved a couple million. What the hell are you doing? So that's all we're saying is, like, if you overspend on Bradley Beal, you are doing it at the trade-off at other things you are still going to have to pay for, which is, for the record, why we think that, Washington's not looking in great shape. Weird freaking thing, too. I didn't realize that they had done this, I think, initially when we were kind of talking the offseason and Patrick's predictions. But, like, they got rid of Satoransky and John Wall's still injured. Like, and I think they also lost Otto Porter. So it's like this team lost Satoransky, a young, promising rookie, for not that much money. I mean, I think it was like $20 million a season, but that's nothing. That's still less than Bradley Beal. And I believe we think Satoransky is a better player. I'll look that up real quick. Otto Porter, who might have, I think Otto Porter is this weird category where what I would say is he is probably underpaid by what we think if you play him as a small forward, but overpaid by free market. There are these weird players. Kenneth Reed's one of my favorite too in this regard, which is to say a player that a team overpaid for what they needed to pay, right? They gave 20, but they could have said 15 and gotten a yes, but their production is still worth it. I don't quite know how to qualify that. But yeah, like, what the hell is Washington doing getting rid of Satoransky and Otto Porter and keeping Bradley Beal? They are not going to do, they can still be a playoff team there out east, but it is just a baffling maneuver.
Yeah, and Otto Porter is just a lot better than Beal too. So I mean, he plays a different position, I guess, but still, yeah, I'm not positive on them at all. And that's really been the story, I think, is John Wall just hasn't been healthy the last few years, and they're never gonna go anywhere with him hurt.
Well, they could, but I mean, that's the funny thing, right? If you have a star player that's injured and you have to work around them, well, that's fine, but you have to be clever about it. And being clever is not paying market value for a shooting guard. And Otto Porter, interesting thing, I think we've noted this before, he is not quite as good as he was at his peak, which was a few seasons ago, although it looks very clear that he was either banged up or something. But basically, he's gotten moved to a stretch 4, so we think he's being played out of position and possibly going through injury. So it is possible that Bradley Beal is better than Otto Porter next season. And we're not necessarily against them getting rid of Otto Porter. Saturansky, though, was right out. Okay, we got a couple of extensions. Do you have a site up that has them?
Yeah. The bunch came in today, and there's also a lot of waiver stuff going on. But, by the way, before we move on, did you see the breaking news on Donovan Mitchell today? Speaking of Donovan Mitchell.
Oh, what do we got?
He has been downgraded 2 inches in height from 6'3" to 6'1" based on the new rules. So can you cut him some slack? He's only 6'1", Dre. He can't. He's
so this gets funny. I think I mentioned you. I don't recall if I mentioned this to you on the show or just mentioned it before. So world's a weird place, right? With statistics now. I have a son, and you get all sorts of data on them young, and they can start estimating how tall they're going to be, et cetera, based on early things. And of course, what I did as the geeky dad is I took my son's estimated height and weight based on his young age and said, what's he going to be when he's older? And the player he came closest to based on Basketball Reference stats was
Donovan Mitchell.
Donovan Mitchell. So if Donovan Mitchell's been downgraded, my son may one day be bigger than Donovan Mitchell.
You're going to have to find a new comp.
Yeah, I will. I'll have to look at all the new stuff. Although, again, what I've noted is funny about this is, one, leaving out wingspan makes this odd, because if you're going by the height and weight, that is a stat we think tends to matter. And it also, I think it's going to get people chasing a weird rabbit hole. Because, I mean, as an example, we've brought up Ethan Strauss. Ethan Strauss has had a vendetta against Dwight Howard forever because Dwight Howard was listed as a 7-footer. And he's like, he's 6'9", but I mean, as a 6'9" center, he's amazing. And it's funny, I realized this, Brian, on the show where we were talking the new heights, I made the comment about entrance criteria, saying, you have to be at least this tall to enter the NBA. And then once you get that tall, we look at your production, not your height. And I made a funny note where I said, well, I'm probably not ever going to want to have a center below 6'7", but, beyond, you get a 6'7" player and you're fine. And part of the reference was to Draymond Green, but Draymond Green's been upgraded to 6'5". So it's like, even that, right? Even that notion that I gave is right out. Basically, I think height matters less than people think it does. Oh, I'm so mad that I'm missing this, but he's a 5'6" guy on the Bears. Do you know who I'm talking about?
On the Chicago Bears?
Chicago Bears.
No. He
okay. So I'm going to risk I don't even care. Risk a strike. So if you look up Tariq, Tarik.
Oh no, I saw that. The Saints player's making fun of him. That was mean. I was not cool with that.
But he won. No. It's better. So he wins. So
he's a good player.
After the play, the Saints players make fun of him, but Tariq Cohen showed the video of it. And so what happens is, basically, Tariq Cohen catches a pass. A Saints player, I don't know their names, apologies, comes in and hits him. Cohen stays on his feet and then knocks the other guy over to go out of bounds. And then they're making fun of his height. And it's like, it's one of those things. It's like, you are choosing the wrong time to make fun of this guy. Because he just laid one of you out. So if you're trying to say, haha, look how short you are, it's like, he just kicked your ass. Like, are you really going to try and insult him now? He just won the fight.
The Saints did blow out the Bears in the game, though, so I'll give him that much.
Yeah, well, we've mentioned this in football, right? There's only so much one player can do.
Yeah.
We've brought up the point on Tom Brady, where if you look at Tom Brady's greatness, there are so many Super Bowls he won, because they've won so many stupid freaking Super Bowls, where it was essentially like the opposing team did something stupid on defense, on offense, and the Patriots defense capitalized, and that's why they won. It's going, as great as Tom Brady is, he had nothing to do with that. Okay, let's get to some other. You were saying,
ready for some contracts?
All right, I'm ready.
Right.
Let's go to Buddy Hield, because I have it
Buddy
on.
Hield, yeah. 4 years, $86 million with $20 million in incentives for Buddy Hield. And this is interesting because just a day or two ago, apparently the sides were really far apart and nowhere near a deal. Buddy Hield was speaking out against the Kings in the media, and then the deal happened. So he got paid.
I mentioned this as something I like, coming back to Greg Steele, because I've said I've been loving having a model that I don't hate to compare to. As elitist as that sounds. And I still, as we mentioned, we still might have some disagreements, but that's fine. But the players we have kept looking at are players that we like more than that we like more than Greg, or that Greg likes more than us. And I'm finally happy to have player the other way around, which is Greg says Buddy Hield is a slightly above average player, basically like league average on third or fourth year. we think Buddy Hield is slightly better than Greg. So I'm actually happy. But both us and Greg would say, what the hell are you doing? To your point, the weakest position in the NBA, an average player that you are now overpaying on a subpar team. This is just a bad contract. Though what I want to actually get in the habit of as we're discussing this contract is I want to phrase it the other way, Brian. I want to say standing ovation to Buddy Hield, standing ovation to Bradley Beal. Get your money. Amazing work.
Yeah, that's right. And Buddy Hield is even tougher than some of the other players we're going to talk about because he's 25 already this season. And the age curve says, well, he might improve, but probably not, right? Usually you improve before the age of 25. So
he's in the area where he can peak. And I think it is worth noting that when we're using the research that Dave Barry did for the age curve, his books came out 2008 and 2010, respectively, I believe. And it has seemed like there, we don't know if there have been medical changes, et cetera, right? Obviously, one and done becoming more of the norm. So who even knows? But it is just one of the bigger thing is, even if you were to assume that Buddy Hield had an upside, that's a lot of upside to justify that contract.
Exactly. Yeah, even if the best case scenario happens, he'll probably just barely, make the contract, right? And that's not what you want for a contract this big. You want your big contracts to pay way more than they're worth, right? These players like Steph Curry and LeBron James, yeah.
It's actually a couple. We've talked a couple of scenarios. Obviously, the ideal is you get one of the top 10, what we'll call championship makers. This is a point James Bricotto brought up way back in the day at Wages of Wins, just noting that, a team, you could not win a title, or at least we had not seen a team win a title without a top 10 player. And I think I even went a little further. I forget if I ever published this, but excluding Marcus Camby on the 1999 Knicks, you didn't even get a team to the title without it. So, right, you need a top. So let's say
he played like a top 10 player in the playoffs that year, even though he wasn't previously.
Exactly. I've called it like the Camby butterfly effect or something, right? Like if a player transforms into a star in the playoffs, fantastic. You could argue, by the way, that LeBron James did that in 2007. In 2007, I think our numbers said LeBron James was a very good player, even a star player, but not elite. And then obviously in the 2007 playoffs, it wasn't until he literally ran into one of the greatest teams in the NBA, coached by one of the greatest coaches, that their plan was just to shut down LeBron, which is all they needed to do. And it's worth noting that the Pistons tried that the round before and lost. So that's LeBron. But yeah, if a player doesn't turn into a star in the playoffs, you basically have no hope. So fine, if you want to spend even money on a star player, fine. Or if you want to spend a lot of money on a player that puts you over the hump,
right.
Player I keep saying Al Horford, and it is probably the case, by the way, for Philadelphia. I really like Philadelphia this season.
Me too.
My dark horse, by the way, I'm pissy about this because I'm going to disagree with it, which is fine. I think if he's healthy, so I think if Embiid plays 70 games, I think Embiid gets the MVP.
Ooh, I like that. That's the big question, though, right? Is people don't think he's going to be healthy. That's probably why you could get a good number on that MVP bet.
Well, because I'm just thinking the Bucks are gonna step back, and it's really hard to get back-to-back MVPs, especially when your team gets worse. One of our favorites is Michael Jordan. We argue 1989 was Michael Jordan's best season. For those that don't remember, he got MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in 1988. So we're saying he played even better the next season, but the Bulls went from 55 wins to 52 or something like that. So that's kind of our point, is that it's, even if you're amazing, it's hard to get back-to-back MVPs if your team does worse. And then just trying to look at some other players. I mean, I could be wrong, but the sports media tends to dislike decisions. So that makes things like Paul George, Kawhi, LeBron, and Anthony Davis difficult. So I could definitely, I think the 76ers are in a great spot. I think with the signing of Al Horford and moving Tobias Harris back to the 3, essentially, that Tobias Harris gets better. They have a really good team. And I think, if they win the East with 60 wins and Joel Embiid leads the teams in rebounds and points, Ben Simmons will be the real star, but he'll probably get 17 points, 9 assists, and 8 rebounds with 2 blocks and a steal, which will be MVP amazing. They'll probably give it to Joel Embiid.
Yeah, I can see that happening.
Okay, but but sorry, to that point, Al Horford puts that team to the next level, right? Like Al Horford as a 4 puts that team at the level that lets you get a star. You can't be a team that's building it then spends this much money on a mediocre player.
Yeah, that point is good. Two things that are a silver lining, I think, for the Buddy Hield deal. It is a little bit less money than some of these other deals. He starts out at $24 million next year in the extension, and it's actually a descending contract. So by 23-24, he's only getting paid $18 million, starting out at 24. So a silver lining, but still probably a bad deal.
Okay, who do we got next?
Who do we have next? Let's go back here. Sabonis agrees to a 4-year, $74.9 million extension with the Pacers.
It's a steal. Amazing. Good job, Pacers. Sorry, we're going to have to give you, going the other way, we're going to have to give you a wah-wah to Sabonis. I don't know if he could have gotten paid more, but he in a just world, he deserves to get paid more.
And this is another situation where things turn really quickly. It seemed like yesterday, the day before, he was on his way out. He was part of trade rumors, and he was going to get dealt. But they re-signed him, and that's starter money, so they should give him a lot more minutes than they have in the past. But, yeah, I mean, this is less than $20 million a year for all 4 years of this. That is just amazing. And, again, he's a big man, so such a more valuable position than shooting guard, and he does shoot threes in addition to all the big man stuff. So people are rightly saying he's one of the best bigs, young bigs in the league. I agree with that, and the Pacers are a good-looking team. They got a really good contract.
Get over 2,000 minutes, man. That's all you need to do. But he's amazing. We like him.
Unless Oladipo, unless that injury, festers for a while, I think the Pacers could be a really good team this year. And then there's a theory that he's on The Masked Singer, Dre. Have you heard that? That Oladipo is one of the Masked Singers? I don't know if that's true.
So, but that's amusing. I know Paul Schaefer was the bunny, right?
I don't know. I haven't been keeping up with it.
All right.
That's funny.
Who do we got next? That was such an easy one. I'm happy. Good job, Pacers. You're looking good.
Yeah. Okay, next. Jaylen Brown, 4 years, $115 million with the Celtics.
Now, what's interesting is I think initially I wasn't as mad at this, but I think this is one where I think I looked him up, and I think both us and Greg said he's about average.
Yeah. And he is still very young. I think he's only 22 still, so that's something, but he wasn't that good in college, really. I hate to say that because, he went to school here in the East Bay, but yeah, he hasn't been good enough yet, I don't think, to justify this deal.
He's had one season at basically Bradley Beal level. I would say Bradley Beal average. So Bradley Beal's ceiling has been decent. Bradley Beal's ceiling is one where I was like, if you could promise me for the next 2 years you were there and our team had done the smart thing and, kept Satoransky and traded Otto Porter for something good, then fine. But I'm, can't give them credit with that Bradley Beal for that because he doesn't put them over the top. But like Jaylen Brown, you're going to have to expect a lot of progression out of him. And this is kind of a baffling one too, in that, for instance, like he doesn't shoot that. His best season, he had a 56.2% true shooting. Last season, 54.7. I kind of don't understand this contract, to be honest.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It kind of reminds me of the D'Angelo Russell contract that the Warriors gave to him, in that, the young player who's, been probably above average for their age and is an exciting and talented young player, but there's just not enough production there yet to say I'm going to do the deal this big. And it's going to take so much for them to get the value out of this contract, and it's very unlikely, I think. Yeah,
I'd agree with that. Okay, got any more?
We have more.
Oh, God. Okay, keep going.
DeJounte Murray, 4 years, $64 million with the Spurs.
Okay, so the thing about that, and actually I realize I have to go back to 2018, because he was out all, that was a big the Spurs, in theory, at the beginning of the season last year. That amount of money means that it's really hard for me to be mad at that player. Like, you just, okay, so was it 4 years, 64, if I'm remember?
Yep, 4 years, 64.
Like, again, kind of divide per year by 2.2. So that's 16 million a year. That's less than 8 wins a season. And our argument is an average starter should, if you're doing things right, get you about 6. DeJounte Murray is one of these interesting ones where this is really tough to know, where he looked close to Brian's star level on a permanent basis in 2018, but only played 1,700 minutes. So he'd be worth that money based on his total production in 2018. But that's kind of the point, is that if he returns to form with what he was in 2018, he's worth the money. But he's a young player, so if he has upside, this could be like a Steph Curry situation. I'm not saying he'll be.
I was thinking that too. His last contract, right? Because his previous contract was a steal for the Warriors because Curry had been hurt, just like Murray, right? Obviously, it's tough to compare anyone to Steph Curry, but I think the Spurs have that kind of upside in this contract.
Yeah, basically, I think Curry and Ty Lawson got similar deals, which was like, I think 4 years, $48 million or something on the old CBA.
Exactly. And this is kind of the equivalent of that in the new CBA, right?
Yeah, it's identical, where they're saying, I was injured, so I just want to take the guaranteed long-term money because I can't guarantee my health. But then if they're healthy, it's huge. So, I mean, if DeJounte Murray can come back and play 1,500 minutes a season, he's worth that money. And if he comes back and follows the age curve, it's great. It's one of these, we might talk a little Klay Thompson. I mentioned that towards the end of the show. And the funny thing is, Klay Thompson is, if everything goes right, they get their money back on that deal. So we're never fans of deals like that. Whereas this is one which goes, if everything goes right, you basically get, twice your value for this contract. So we agree with that.
Exactly. Taurean Prince and the Nets agreed to a 2-year, $29 million extension. I just don't care about this deal very much.
So say the amounts again. 2-year, 29.
2 years, 29. Not a very big contract, just not very impactful.
Let me take a look at Prince real quick. Below average wing. I mean, why?
It's just
is what it is, I guess.
What you say? Okay, here's one. Cavaliers claim Alfonso McKinney off waivers. The Warriors cut Alfonso McKinney, and I wasn't shocked because it was rumored for a while that it was going to happen, but I was more like, why? Everyone says he's not very good at defense, but he's one of the best rebounding small forwards in the league, and the Warriors are desperate for rebounds, so this doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Now, they're hard capped, and they really needed a big man, so I guess that's the reason why, but they shouldn't have put themselves in this position.
So they just wait. So what? They just cut him, just waived him for the money?
They just cut him, and now he's on the Cavaliers.
Well, that's a shame that he's on the Cavaliers, because it looks like he could do a lot of good to help people. I mean, above average true shooting, right? 56.9%. He was really good rookie, but so who knows? Really good at rebounding, like you're noting. Yeah, that's a shame, especially with with Klay Thompson out. That would be something helpful to have. So.
Joe Ingles agrees to a 1-year, $14 million extension. That's a pretty cheap price for Joe Ingles. That sounds great for the Jazz.
Really? They got him for that little?
Yeah, it's only 1 year, though, so there's probably some story, like there's something planned, who knows, in the future. But, yeah, he's going to start at small forward, I think, alongside Bogdanovich. That
is baffling how, Paul, I mean, we're going to have to give him the thumbs down, right? I mean, to this weird Buddy Hield point, right? This is a guy that has a 40.8% three-point shooting for his career. I remember looking at the past. Do you have his old contract up on Spotrac by chance?
No, we can bring that up.
I seem to recall looking at his old contract and going funny. He actually got paid what he was worth. So, this is good news for the future. This is good news for Donovan Mitchell, because it means there's extra money that has no business being on the cap.
Yeah, he's making 11.9 this year.
Yeah, but he had a 4-year, $50 million contract. So that wasn't horrible. I mean, It was underpaid, but not horrible. But this seems bizarrely bad, in my opinion. So,
yeah, it's just kind of one more year of the same for him, right? So really good for the Jazz.
Yeah, good deal. Good job, Jazz. Apologies, Ingles. Sacramento Kings. Maybe you should have spent that Buddy Hield money on Ingles. All right. Any others?
No, it's just down to the Zion injury now. All the contracts are done. So
why don't we hop ahead then, actually, and just talk this, because I did have that on the script. First off, I want to stress that I bring this up all the time on the show. We are never fans of injury. Injuries don't prove anything, no matter how much we ever dislike a player. We're never like woohoo on injury. And obviously, this is an easier one. All of us were excited about Zion. So, I mean, all of us thought Zion was an amazing looking rookie. So we weren't happy about this to begin with, but I always like to preface any like comments after an injury as please don't pretend as if like we're happy this happened, because the take I'm going to take is, does nobody remember NBA history? I've kind of joked with you before, Brian. This is my meta commentary, my Groundhog Day-ish take on my Groundhog Day-ish take, as weird as that sounds, which is I watch people forget NBA history all the time. And that happens so much that I now over and over again am watching people over and over again forget NBA history. So nice nested for loop there for computer science fans. But it's interesting, right? Because you know Zion happens and everybody's like, oh my God, he's going to change this team. One of my favorite. It might be apocryphal. I love that word now, Brian. I use it all the time. But when Greg Oden was drafted, I recall, and I might be misremembering because I haven't been able to track down this article since. I might have read it in a newspaper, actually, Brian, so that might be why it's hard. Remember those days where you'd read NBA news in newspapers? But it was a writer wrote something like, it's not a question of if Greg Oden brings a title to Portland, it's a question of when. And for what it's worth, Greg Oden was an amazing. We loved him in college. We loved his college numbers. Brandon Roy was amazing. I think that was a pretty stacked team. So that was a reason.
Brandon Roy played on Washington Huskies. There is a different NBA guard on Ohio State. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about the pros, not the college. Okay. Sorry.
Is going Brandon Roy on the Blazers, man.
Yeah, I thought you meant his college days.
Okay, I don't know. Impressive work knowing his college days, man. That's nice. But that's what I was saying is the Blazers looked poised, and then just Greg Oden was never healthy, and then Brandon Roy was never healthy, and it all fell apart. And it's going, this confidence people will have in amazing players on a team while forgetting how common injury is. I'll shout out Devin Dignam back in the day. I remember he was looking that up too around the Greg Oden days because a number of number one pick players had dealt with a lot of injury, right? Don't forget Yao Ming, Greg Oden kind of had breakdowns. What's his name? Now plays for the Pistons. Blake Griffin, right? Missed an entire season. Ben Simmons missed an entire first season. It's like the certainty people have that a young up and coming player is going to change everything. First off is overstated, right? It's very rare that young players are immediately great. Even Luka Doncic, who we think is like the greatest thing since sliced bread, we would not call him a contender maker last season, right? Like we think he has the potential to become a contender maker, but even with that amazing first season, we don't think he was quite there yet. So most rookies aren't contender makers, but injuries happen a lot to young players, and it's amazing how quickly people forget this. And you actually had some more bad news from another person we love, DataFox21. I'll let you share that tweet and comment.
Yeah, so he's replying to another tweet where someone was saying basically Zion has to lose weight. And Data Fox's reply was he agrees. And he said, I found 4 guys out of 84 who weighed over 270 pounds, drafted in the lottery, who played 60-plus game seasons in their career. And Zion is heavier than most of them. He's 285 and jumps higher than all of them.
Obviously, what are the 4? So obviously Shaquille O'Neal is the goldish standard, and we'll get back to that in a second.
Yeah, he doesn't actually say. He just posted what I just said. But yeah, I mean, we could ask him. But yeah, Shaq is the famous one, right? And like you were saying before the show, Shaq had his minutes regulated because of this, right? So yeah, it's going to be a concern for Zion.
It's worth noting that Shaq, when he left Orlando, this was, you've kind of deserved having a horrible team, Orlando, for the type of fans you've been to both Shaq and Dwight. But when Shaq was leaving Orlando, people were saying they didn't know if he was worth it because he was starting to get banged up. When he made it to Los Angeles, one of the key parts of his career and why his career went so well was Phil Jackson. In Phil Jackson's books, he said his goal was to get Shaq playoff ready. So under one of the reasons Shaquille O'Neal only has 1 MVP is because he would routinely play like in the mid 60s in terms of games. He'd miss 15 games a season. And part of that was intentionality on Phil Jackson's part. He said, it doesn't matter to me if we get 5 extra wins in the regular season, if Shaquille O'Neal isn't healthy in the postseason. But that's also key. The other player I brought up is Tim Duncan. 2 smart coaches realizing the health of my star player is what matters. We don't necessarily know that the Pelicans are going to do that with Zion. So that is troubling, and we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, one thing that I wonder, I don't know if you have this in your head or not right now, but it feels like Shaq got robbed a few seasons. Like maybe the year Steve Nash won, Shaq should have won. But that
Steve,
I can't remember off the top of my head.
here's Nash one was in part the decision, right? Shaq had moved to Miami,
Hmm.
set with that. I think we actually liked Steve Nash better that season. Um,
Interesting.
I think it was a tough one. We've kind of mentioned this like an Oscar film thing where it's like sometimes you put up an MVP caliber season like James Harden and don't win the MVP.
Magic Johnson as well.
Kawhi Leonard is also another player that's done this, right? Like I think we definitely thought Kawhi Leonard put up an MVP caliber season the year Steph Curry went unanimous.
Yeah.
It's just, we just said that Steph Curry just went unanimous. So I think Shaquille O'Neal is one of those people that in some of his best seasons, there were justifiable people in front of him. But then I think he was also knocked on consideration that he might have gotten otherwise because of how banged up, how many games he missed.
Yeah, and back to Zion briefly. I've heard people say he had the best college numbers of anyone this millennia, basically, right, of the 2000s and 2010s. And I can believe that. But some people say Brandon Clark, who was in the same draft, might have had the second best numbers, that he had a ridiculous college career, and he has been proving it so far in the preseason. So, yeah, perception is funny that way, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, I don't have much else to say. I just hope he gets well. Hope whatever medical training is required for him to have a long, fruitful career happens. But just the reminder to everybody, when there is certainty in preseason predictions, I mentioned two data Fox. Actually, I was like, I don't really do preseason predictions anymore because there's so much work and they go out the window so quickly. But I was really proud last season when I was just like, yeah, injuries happen. People are overestimating the Warriors because they're expecting a beat up team that has played that Klay Thompson point. I don't recall if we said this on the show or pre-show, but that he thinks he might have played the most games in the NBA the past 4 seasons, which sounds about right. It might be LeBron. Maybe not after last. Maybe I think LeBron's last season knocks him out of contention. But if we're saying last season, I think Klay Thompson might have the most minutes played in the NBA regular season and postseason combined. And I just like this is a beat up team that has been playing a lot of minutes and expecting that they're all going to come back healthy, especially when some of them, including DeMarcus Cousins, Steph Curry, have had injuries. It's ludicrous. The exact same things with rookies. When you're like, oh my goodness, this rookie is going to change everything. I just have to go, I can name 4 top caliber rookie players in the top 3, Blake Griffin, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, right? Greg Oden. In the last decade, I can name 4 players off the top of my head with no problem that have missed major time due to injury. So it's kind of just the classic don't overreact. And of course, a week into the preseason, if the Nuggets are like 6-0, Brian, I'm going to be overreacting. So I'm not even going to point. That's what I preach.
I mean, it's all PR, right? Like all the sports talk, guys and everything say, oh, that, you have to develop all your players and it's a failure if you don't and all that. But we know that in a given year of an NBA draft, you're going to be lucky to get 1 or 2 stars out of the whole draft, right?
I think Patrick's count it's about 3, and then it's very, very dispersed. So it's not even like 3 of the top 10 players turn into stars. It's like you get whoever the number, one of the top 3 picks maybe becomes a Brian star. Maybe someone in the lottery turns really great after a couple seasons. Then maybe someone like Nikola Jokic in the second round turns amazing. But it's,
Yeah, so that's pretty much the point is expectations are all out of whack with rookies especially.
Yep. I mean, basically, you would want an Arturo plus shotgun model is how I'd call it, which is you'd want, for all the criticism we've heaped on Hinkie for other stuff he did, his draft strategy was on point.
Yeah.
Which you want to acquire as many draft picks as possible because that's how you find stars. You have to try a lot of players. You can't expect that your draft model that loves this player is going to be the next big thing.
Yep.
All right, let's talk some more internet drama with some subtweeting. I'm not going to name names, Brian. I discussed my opinions with them enough. They know where I stand. They've already talked to me. I've already said it directly to their face, so I don't feel the need to say their names on Twitter, except where noted in this. But so a couple weeks ago, I made a tweet that got some flames. That was I've said it accurately, Brian. It was a subtweet of a lot of the advanced analytics movement, but was directly inspired by Raptor. where I said there are a lot of statistical methods that are used in basketball stats, mainstream analytics, whatever you want to call that, that would not be acceptable in normal practice. I basically said, normally when you make a model and it doesn't come out the way you want, you don't then change the output to look like what you expect to be. That's not what you do. And I said, unfortunately, it's become very much the norm by a bunch of, and the term I used was hobbyist in the advanced analytics community in basketball. And shocker, some people, including like Seth Partnow, formerly of the Bucks, didn't like it, which wasn't a shocker because when I looked at Raptor, they're like, thank you to these people. And some of the people that didn't like what I said, it helped with Raptor. So it's not a shocker that one, they knew I was talking about them, and then two, they didn't like what I said. But that's kind of continued to this next week. And there were just a couple good overarching points that came out of some of these discussions that I thought were nice teachable moments. So as fun as it is to be like internet drama, ha ha ha, I was right. I think a better thing when we're talking about being a data analyst is to kind of talk about some high level stuff. And one of the first interesting lessons is someone who's commented on a lot of message boards to myself on some of these communities I've talked and I was talking with on Twitter, said a couple of things about the wins produced formula that was false. He said the wins produced formula just adds in a team adjustment, which is untrue. The way the wins produced formula works is it uses the offensive rating and defensive rating. These are Dean Oliver's concepts from Basketball on Paper. It regresses them on team winning percent and determines how each of those impacts wins. The answer is a lot. You can basically explain 94% of the variation in wins, in winning percentage in the NBA using offensive rating and defensive rating. And the awesome news about that is you can then break apart offensive rating and defensive rating and attribute all of those box score stats to players. And then Dave went one step further to say, let's look at the reliability of those box score stats year to year to see if we think it's skill. And the answer is for the most part, yes. Some of the harder ones, by the way, are like shooting efficiency. So actually when you're grading players that are like good rebounders, like you were pointing out there, Brian, unlike McKinney, you're probably more confident that Alonzo McKinney is going to be a good rebounder next year than you are that Buddy Hield's going to be a good 3-point shooter. That's
exactly.
So that's that. All right. And all of that, by the way, has been on the web since 2008. He updated it, but it's on how to calculate wins produced at thewagesofwins.com. So that's there. So he said that, and it's like patently false. And then we started having some discussions about RPM, and he said there are detailed step-by-step explanations of how to calculate RPM. And this was a shocker to me because I was unaware of them, and I actually asked him about it. And what was amusing is I watched him kind of in real time. If you're really so inclined, you can go to my Twitter feed and see mentions. And I watched him make that claim, and then he got upset with me. I said, hey, you say there are comprehensive guides for how to calculate RPM. Can you link them to me? And he said, I didn't say comprehensive. He said step-by-step detailed. So apologies for that misconstruing that in my reply, which I think that's like a synonym, but I could be wrong.
Misconstrusion? Is that a way to say it? I don't think so. That's not real.
If it's not, we should make it a word. Let's start working on that now, Brian. And in 10, 20 years, it'll get added to Webster's dictionary or whatever. But I watched him try and go through, and a couple of things he discovered were, one, there were dead links to blogs that had explained stuff before. Two, there weren't really any what I would call step-by-step guides that he brought up directly. I'm going to get to one in just a second. There was one that kind of qualifies, but I'll explain why it does in a second. And then a lot of them were like for APM. So what was amusing is this person was using their own memory to say what was wrong with wins produced, despite the fact that there was a write-up of it out there, and that there were these other well-written definitions out there for this other metric, which there weren't. And so this gets into a metacognition point. How do we know what we know? When you think you know something and you get pressed on it, it is fine to actually take a step back and say, where did I hear that? And to dig in. And I mean, this is to get us briefly political, but though not really. One of the things that pisses us off a lot with media is how frequently news is reported and people don't dig one step further. What you've noted is very frustrating that Trump has realized. So Trump is by no means unique in this, but Trump has realized this works is Trump will say something, then he will get all of his surrogates to parrot it. And then so a reporter will say, I heard from 4 different sources that they said this, but if you really, really track it down, it's one source, right? Everybody is quoting one source. They think they're quoting 5 sources, but they are quoting 5 sources that are quoting one source. And this, I see the same thing happen with basketball analytics. People will say, "I know this is true. I've heard it from these 4 people." And then when you track it back, they're like, "Oh, they're quoting one person, and that person didn't understand what they were reading." So, kind of a metacognition point there. The second one that's kind of frustrating is data transparency. So I did mention there was one walkthrough that kind of qualifies for RPM. This was Justin Jacobs, I believe is his name, Squared 2020, great follower. Has a lot of good stuff on his site about basketball analytics, and I believe has worked with a team. And he had a walkthrough on how basically it was a reverse engineering of RPM that he had in his site. And I asked him about it, and eventually he basically pointed me at a GitHub repository of his code to do RPM, which I am going to break down. And some of the interesting points is he said he would never put it in production, right? Like if it was I'm assuming he's a software engineer or has software engineering background. It's not something he would be comfortable in a real world environment pushing. He said it was ugly code, whatever, but it's there. So I'll give him to that. And he basically said he believes this is the RPM that was used to seed Raptor, possibly BPM. But he also said that on his site, because he had done some walkthroughs, that he had removed coefficients, and his reasoning was he was asked by an EC, I'm assuming that means Eastern Conference teams, to remove the coefficients to prevent cheaters in the job application process. And I said I didn't fault that answer, but I was honestly floored. And this has been a problem. Arturo and myself at Sloan a few years back actually got interviewed and made this point. And then DataFox21, Paul DeVos on Twitter, noted this too, that someone did a breakdown of Sloan papers and the data sets they use and just noted the number of data sets in Sloan papers that are proprietary, meaning there is no hope of replication. There is no hope for us to know it's right. I think you mentioned Ben Falk. Correct me if I'm wrong here. I think Ben Falk commented that there was a chart in a paper, and that was great because you were able to take the chart and map the chart to data. But without that chart, you'd have no idea what was going on. Does that sound familiar?
Maybe. Not familiar enough for me to say anything right now.
I'm not on that last one. I'm not going to be 100% sure, but someone commenting on Sloan noted there was a paper that had a chart in it, and that chart provided the data, but without that chart, the paper would have had nothing. For instance, Joe Sill's original RAPM, which is the metric RPM is based off of basically. RPM, I realize I probably should have put this at the header, Brian. I think we mentioned I'm more alert today. I got sleep. I think you didn't get sleep. I think normally it would have stopped me to just explain it. RPM is in theory a regression on a regression to try and explain plus minus stints to players. So
you talked about this a lot last week. So if anyone wants to.
Thanks for giving me the easy out, Brian.
Yeah.
So go listen to last week's show if you need more. But basically, our issue with it has been, and we talked this on last week's show, there's not steps for it. Now, the wins produced formula, it might take you some work, might take you some headbanging, but there is a walkthrough, and that has been up there for a decade now. If you want to replicate wins produced, the steps are up there. The logic is up there. You can do it. And then there are amazingly the same sources, myself, Dave Barry, Patrick Mittner, all around if you have questions. Whereas there is no RAPM or RPM walkthrough that is canonical out there. And we thought that was a problem. So the data transparency issue, and it is one of the hard parts about basketball statistics where it makes it really hard to judge a lot of where we're at. So like I said, I kind of wanted the 2 teachable lessons, which would be like, how do you know what you know? And then when a lot of data isn't transparent, are you as sure as you think you are on it? So at least want those out there in the ether as general comments.
To be continued.
To be continued. Like I said, to the same person, I said, like, we've had this discussion forever. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to change your mind. I did an Elmo shrugging gif. And he was just like, way to not change my mind. I was like, well, just not going to happen. Okay. The last point I wanted to give, just to see if I could bait you a little. I'm slowly releasing Greg Steele's offseason grades. And then, of course, a bunch of offseason moves happened at the last second. So maybe we'll have to update some of them. But he gave Klay Thompson like a B grade on his Warriors write-up. And I was really curious what you thought of that. In part because Klay Thompson has been a contentious one for us, right? We rank him lower than Greg. But when I looked over Greg's numbers, a point that came up to me is one I've heard Bill James and Stan Van Gundy say before, which is being on the court. The exact same thing we were just saying about Shaq. Klay Thompson has played over 74 games and over 34 minutes a game every season since his sophomore year. And that's huge, right? If you know you can have Klay Thompson on the court and you don't have to worry about replacement players or wins above replacement backups, et cetera, that is huge. And so when we're looking at Klay's defense as an example, which is a place where Greg grades him higher than we do, what I noticed is Klay Thompson as like total points wins on defense for his position. But the reason that happens is because he plays more minutes than other players. Greg has me very excited because he does think that Torrey Craig and Gary Harris on the Denver Nuggets thinks they're really good at defense. And oh my goodness, please be healthy, please be healthy, please be healthy. That would be huge for the Nuggets. But the reason Torrey Craig ranks below Klay Thompson or Gary Harris. So Torrey Craig's a point guard, Gary Harris is shooting guard by conventional assignments. The reason Gary Harris ranks below Klay Thompson is Klay Thompson's total playing time. So when I saw the B grade, I went, if Klay Thompson's healthy, I believe you, but I'm really, really worried about that health.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why I was advocating for letting Klay walk or sign and trading him or just renouncing him. Like
in language there, Brian, I'm going to have to say in poor taste.
I know. I'm sorry, Klay, but he's going to get paid no matter what, though.
Injury, man. Choose a different word other than let him walk. But anyway, continue.
Oh, you went for the pun. I like it. Well, the good thing is with the ACL, he can walk in a straight line very well. He just can't go cut side to side. So he could still walk with that ACL. In fact, we were seeing him walking in the preseason a little bit. But no, the point is, so here's why I think the Warriors are such a debacle right now. When you have Steph Curry, who's one of the best players of all time, he just had one of the best seasons of all time a few years ago, and you're coming off all these championships. You still have Draymond Green, who's one of the best defenders in the league, if not the best. You should be in win now mode. You should not be bringing back players that you can't depend on at all for the season. So, yeah, I think they're letting down Steph Curry by bringing back Klay.
The hard part is the way the CBA works is your ability to sign players is really hard. And for instance, players like Klay Thompson put you in a cap hold situation, right? Until Klay Thompson is traded or whatever, that money can't, you're not allowed to use that money on your cap. And what's more with that injury, who knows what would happen with the trade. So I'm not 100% sure, although given the fact that Kevin Durant got traded, that had to have been a trade that was facilitated for him to go because that's how they got D'Angelo Russell back, right?
Yep.
So the fact that they were able to trade Kevin Durant leads me to believe they probably could have traded Klay to a team like the Knicks would have been perfect, right? You go up to the Knicks, you're like, hey, look at how about Mitchell Robinson? You could get a power forward and a backup power forward because apparently the Knicks maneuver this offseason is to sign every power forward in the NBA. I don't know what they're thinking. They probably could have done that. You're not wrong, right? They could have gone up.
I'm not very strong on the CBA. So could they have just renounced him if they wanted?
Well, that's okay. So, and the reason that gets hard is, there are bird rights. So if you have a player for more than 3 years, you're allowed to go over the cap to retain them. So the reason renouncing Klay could be difficult, right, is, they're giving a lot of money to Draymond Green, Steph Curry, and then they just have basic contracts on their squad already. So it's possible if they renounce Klay, they can't get anybody. So they probably, to your point, should have signed and traded him. And it's possible they're going that direction. We have no idea. And, some of these backroom things get really weird because we don't know what's going on. We talk about this all the time where we are not privy to the trades that are missed, right? We get really, really mad at this team and we have no idea. One of the best examples that we do know behind the scenes too is there was a point in NBA history where Tracy McGrady, Grant Hill, and Tim Duncan were all supposed to go to the Orlando Magic. And then, of course, Grant Hill in the last couple of games of the season gets injured and is never the same afterwards. Tim Duncan gets upset because Doc Rivers says he can't bring his family on the team plane and decides to go back to the San Antonio Spurs. And instead of getting that amazing, amazing squad that, when healthy could have easily won a title, you get a beat up Grant Hill and an upset Tracy McGrady on a squad that doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, another thing on Klay is I've kind of been complaining about him for the last few years. Like, he's 6'7". Why doesn't he rebound more or do anything like that? Well, he's another player who's lost 2 inches with this new height system. He's 6'5" now. So maybe that's why he hasn't been getting, the big man stats. And, that's okay if he's going to stay at shooting guard, but that's not the plan now. When he comes back from injury, they're going to put him at small forward, and it's just clear that he's way too small to play small forward. So, yeah, the Warriors roster is a disaster.
made, he played because obviously Draymond Green plays like a center and is apparently the same height as Klay Thompson. With how we've seen him play for his entire career, it is hard for me to believe that moving him up is a good move. And I mean, to our exact point, Tobias Harris is the inverse, right? I am really high on the 76ers because I'm like, thank goodness Tobias Harris is getting pushed down a notch. And funny note, I don't know if you recall this, in his history, Al Horford, when he was on the Hawks, I believe his father was arguing he was getting played out of position at center and that he should have been a power forward. So now that the 76ers have picked up Al Horford and are going to put him at the power forward instead of the center, and now Tobias Harris slides down to the 3, and they've got Ben Simmons, who is a giant. I am very excited. Whereas you're saying the exact opposite on a team that's already short. That's the point you've been bringing up, right? They do not have a conventional center at the moment, right? Because JaVale McGee walked and all that. Now they're starting to push players up, and you're pushing up players that already didn't look big as a shooting guard. Klay Thompson was not rebounding so well that I'm like, well, absolutely put him at small forward or power forward.
Yeah, so this season is an experiment. Like, can Steph Curry, is he good enough to just carry a whole crappy team by himself? Like, maybe he can. We'll see. But they have not looked good in the preseason at all, Dre.
I mean, not to insult him, like, I like Draymond Green, but Draymond Green is actually in the same kind of, I would say, a tier up from Bradley Beal, but same note, where I'm like, he's a good player and he's a versatile player. So from a Brian Binns productivity standpoint, that's one nice part, his versatility, but he's expensive. And I'm not sure I'm happy with that amount of money on him because it's a fascinating one where I remember the 2016 season where they got an NBA league record in wins and really should have won a title if not for injury.
Yep.
But I'm remembering Draymond from that season. Every season after that, he's been good, not great. So I think you're right. Like, it is Steph Curry and a bunch of above average players, and we'll see how far that gets you out.
I'll say this on Draymond. He has been hurt lately. That's probably been a big part of why he's been worse. So I think he can bounce back from that. He's making under $20 million a year as well. He's not a max player. So he has a somewhat okay deal. But it's like, if he's easily the second best player on your team, that can be tough, right? Like last year, he's maybe the 4th or 5th best player on the team. They had Kevin Durant, they had Andre Iguodala, so now all those guys are gone. So yeah, I mean, hopefully he bounces back healthy, but it's just looking at the Warriors out there, they look like a college team. Like, you don't know who any of these guys are. They look small and slow. Like, it's tough. They're smart. Like, these young guys on the Warriors are smart, but I'm not optimistic right now, Dre.
Just to clarify, though, he did sign an extension, so next year is below $20 million. He's on a 4-year, $100 million a year.
Oh, okay.
Let's clarify. I just said that wrong. 4-year, $100 million contract that averages out to about $25 million a season after.
Yeah, that's as tougher then. He may do that. He may not.
Well, the problem next season, right, is they wasted all the money on D'Angelo Russell. Yeah. And not to be mean to him to say waste, but like, Klay Thompson isn't walking back. I use the same thing I told you not to do, Brian. Klay Thompson isn't coming back next season. Patrick even mentioned that in the case that he does, it probably helps Patrick. It's probably worse if Klay Thompson comes back because he really probably isn't healthy if he tries to. So that's the problem is next season they are spending like how much money is D'Angelo Russell getting next season? Just apologies. I know we've talked this before, but it's
in the mid-20s. I want to say it's a lot of money.
Okay, I'll look it up in just a second if I can get to it. So D'Angelo Russell. Okay. Over under, we'll say survey says, come on, Spotrac, you can do it. I am not going to find it in time. So people in the future listening to this, let us know in the comments if Brian was right. Okay, so I'm going to say that's pretty much it. We got through a lot of stuff. We'll see. We're going to have real numbers and stuff for the NBA season in a week, so we'll have to see how all that looks, Brian. Anything you want to end out on before we head out?
Yeah, I have a shout out, which is when we were going over the contract extensions, I missed maybe the most important one. So I want to talk about that during my shout out.
Siakam?
Pascal Siakam. We missed him. He got a $130 million extension. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
That seems high, actually, but he's young. So let's give him the great. So basically, the way I go is I'll go to wages of wins, right? I'll go look at, or not wages of wins, Boxscore Geeks and look at wins produced. And by those numbers, as a 4, you're like, I'm not sure. But I will give him the Greg Steele out and no, sorry. Actually, no, I did offense. So on offense, he would not be with it. Let's see summative. So let's see offense plus defense, because obviously is a defensive one. No from Greg too. So he's going to need to show some improvement. So we're going to have to give Pascal, you know, positive upside. Has anybody done a Pascal's number pun in their tweeting, or if they haven't, wasted
That'd be
something?
amazing. But yeah, it starts at 29 million next year, it goes up to 35,000. So it's a really big contract. So I'll dig up like a really bad take that I had, which was when Giannis signed his max extension. I said, "Wow, Giannis was really good for a few months, but is that enough time, to say that he's worth this deal?" Of course he was. He ended up being the best, player in the league maybe last year. So Siakam is kind of similar, right? Like he's kind of been mediocre, but then he played really well at times last year for a short period of time.
I'll have to look over his late season. I mean, the thing about Giannis, just as a comparable, is he was close to a Brian Starr in his third season.
Yeah. Siakam's
So
also 25 already, which is rough.
so when he was signed to his max, it was fine. Like I guess I'll put it that way. Like he was age curve plus that, and that's the problem is I've not seen Pascal. I'll take a look at that. I'll give that to myself as homework maybe, or I might just forget about it and see if no one knows. But I'll take a look and see how I feel end of the season, like rolling average kind of stuff.
Yeah, and he's not a shooting guard. That's one good thing. He does play, power forward, so that's a good position at least. But yeah, he's going to have to improve to make this money as well.
All right. Only thing I have to say is I finally got a chance to see Hamilton. The touring company came through Appleton, Wisconsin, so I got to see it. Very good. Enjoyed it. So that's my shout out.
Yeah, and that's my only shout as well.
All right. Well, that's been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live usually Mondays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, barring we don't have a guest or scheduling conflict. You can do that live, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. Miss the live show, you can catch the recaps, channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. And, of course, we have it in podcast form. You can find that on iTunes and Stitcher. The Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote, all that stuff helps us out. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers, co-host Brian Foster, a.k.a. Boxscore Brian. Talk to you next week, and hope your team does well in the opening week.